Story 1. Adam Sandler and I were in the same dorm at New York University. He was really irritating to me, but I was a real asshole back then, so I don't trust my opinion of him. Story 2. In my first job in Seattle, I knew Brendan Fraser a bit before his fame. He was very friendly, humble, and sweet. He was also gorgeous, much more in person than on film. Story 3. Chris Hemsworth. His manager was my buddy, and I used to get him into clubs and take him around Los Angeles, introducing him to people. I've run into him a few times since he became famous, and he always gives me a bear hug and tells whoever he's with, "She babysat me when I moved to Los Angeles." I love him. The sweetest guy. Story 4. Natasha Lyonne and my girlfriend became friendly in the late 1990s. We hung out in the East Village a bit. She's exactly the same. A salty old New York cabbie trapped in the body of a downtown cool kid. Funny as hell. Story 5. My sister's ex-boyfriend went to Christian camp with the Jonas Brothers. This was around the time they were just starting to hit it big. He said they were jerks. Story 6. I have friends who knew Pedro Pascal when he was a struggling actor in New York City. He used to come into the coffee shop my friends worked at and chat with them about auditions and plays he was in. He even gave them tickets to a few of his performances. For a while, he used to comment on their Instagram photos of their kids and wish them happy birthday and whatnot. Obviously, they thought he was a great guy, and for him to stay in touch with a couple of baristas years after he knew them seems to prove he is. Story 7. My parents both knew Ryan Gosling when he was attending the high school where they worked. They always talk about how nice and polite he was. My mom worked with special needs children, and she still talks about how Ryan, who was already a bit of a celebrity, would always take time to talk to them, sit and chat, and was just great with them. The drama teacher at the school at that time is my dad's friend, and he always claims he taught Ryan everything he knows. Story 8. John Bernthal. When we were kids, he was best friends with one of my cousins. I used to be at that house all the time, and eventually my aunt and uncle took me in. John was a typical boy, super wild but a nice kid. He used to absolutely wreck my pillow forts, fart on the pillows, and laugh like a maniac. He was always really smart though, and a good person. I bumped into him years ago when we were in our 30s and congratulated him on his success. He remembered me and said, "Sorry I wrecked your forts." He deserves all the happiness in the world. Story 9. Tony Hawk was just a regular skater kid like everyone else. He did have the only full-sized half-pipe in town, which made him a big local celebrity, but other than that, he was just one of us. Laid back and nice to everyone. Story 10. I worked with J.K. Simmons and Sandra Oh before they were famous. Both worked regularly, though. I don't have a bad thing to say about either of them. I have periodically seen Sandra since then and can say that she is still a wonderful person. I haven't run into JK, but from what I hear, he's still awesome too. Story 11. I used to work with Tyler Joseph from 21 Pilots before they took off. Nice, funny dude that was way too modest about his talent. He begged us to go to their first show, and after one song, we all kind of looked at each other like, well, he's going to be famous. Story 12. I was on the pilot and much of the first season of Malcolm in the Middle. I got to hang out with much of the cast on set. It was just like hanging out with any other middle school kids. I showed Frankie how to burn things with a magnifying glass. Everyone was chill. Story 13. I knew a couple. Ben Affleck was my little brother's best friend, and I used to babysit him and Casey when they were really little. They were nice kids. Paul Reiser is my cousin, and he was a jerk before fame and a bigger jerk after. Story 14. I went to the same high school as Josh Hutcherson, and one of my good friends lived in the same neighborhood. He wasn't around too often because he was already in some movies, but he was just a quiet kid who, at the time, I thought was stuck up. Now I realize it was probably difficult for him to juggle normal high school life and a budding Hollywood career. Future Man is one of my favorite shows, and I wish I could tell him that. Story 15. My brother grew up with all the Impractical Jokers, and Sal was one of his best friends who gave a eulogy at his funeral. Sal is the exact person you see on the show. He used to dress up as a turkey and visit my family every Thanksgiving. We called him the Turkey Man. After my brother passed, He stayed in touch with us and even once bought my mom and me tickets to see one of their traveling shows. He got really emotional seeing my mom. He also wore a shirt for my brother in the movie. All around, just a good person. I still talk to him every now and then. He doesn't always get back to me right away, but he eventually does and is always very concerned about how my family is doing. Story 16. My friend's mom said she went to school with Tony Hawk and was not only friends with him then but has kept in contact since. I was skeptical until she showed me a yearbook from their high school with his signature by his picture. Years later, she sent me a video of them running into each other at an airport back east somewhere. It's still kind of crazy to think he's potentially just a couple of phone calls away. Story 17. Nancy Cartwright, also known as Bart Simpson, lived 2 doors down and babysat my brother and me. Always very funny and kind. She had many roles prior to Bart, but when she got that, she moved to a nicer house. My brother and I helped her move. Story 18. Met Jerry Springer on several occasions when he was in politics before he got into media. The first time I met him was during his unsuccessful congressional run in 1970. He drove a beat-up Volkswagen with one headlight pointed straight up. He was always funny, thoughtful, and a good listener. Story 19. Ben Stiller filmed a movie on the campus of the university where I worked. He seemed like a nice guy, very serious. Since I'm old, 73, I was far less impressed by him than by his parents, who visited the set one day. I had been a fan of Stiller and Mira since I was a kid, and said to me, "I'm Catholic and Jerry's Jewish, and that, pointing to Ben, is our guilt." Story 20. Cleveland Little. He was hitchhiking through our town near sunset, so the minister of our church picked him up and brought him to our house. We fed him dinner, and he entertained us children, 6 of us, with some bedtime stories. He spent the night on the couch, and we all had breakfast together, and then he went on to Hollywood. What a nice guy. Story 21. One of my close friends worked at Chanhassen Dinner Theater with Amy Adams. They said she is the sweetest person. Everyone knew she was going to be a big star. Story 22. Anthony Kerrigan, also known as NoHo Hank from the show Barry, was on my floor in college. He was kind, funny, maybe a little aloof, but a sweetheart. It's wonderful to see him achieve success and advocate for alopecia. Story 23. John Krasinski was a young man who had just shaved his head for a Polaroid commercial and was working the box office at my theater. He taught me all about Craigslist. Cool guy. Story 24. I grew up with Chris Stapleton. He was the most popular kid in school but was super nice and a genuinely good guy. I went to one of his shows when he was just starting to become famous and talked to him afterward. He was exactly the same. He seemed to be sincerely happy to see me and talked about a few old times before he had to go. I am super happy to see him have so much success. Story 25. Adam Devine went to high school in my area, was an obnoxious person at the 2 parties I ever saw him at, but most teenage boys in Nebraska are obnoxious people, so I don't hold that against him. Still a fan of his work. Story 26. I was in high school marching and concert band with Tony Kanal and had a college art class with Gwen Stefani. Both really nice kids. At a high school reunion, Tony was surrounded by fangirls. I was sitting at a table with some other old band friends, and he made a point to come over and chat with us for a while. And Gwen was always super sweet and kind. Story 27. My dad knew Obama. His best friend was college roommates with him, and he even stayed with my grandparents in Pakistan. He is apparently an extremely humble and genuine person. My dad had great things to say about him. When in Pakistan, I heard he treated the servants and poor folks with a ton of respect as well. Story 28. Jennifer Lawrence. She was a neighbor in my stepsister's brownie troupe, and they went to school together. At one point, Jennifer was pet-sitting my goldfish, and she almost killed it. Story 29. WWE Women's Champion, Rhea Ripley. We used to work together on independent wrestling shows when she started out. Always fun to hang out with and super chill. Ironically, she hated wearing makeup because she thought it would be selling out and not metal. Everyone knew she was going to be a massive star, even when she was still an awkward teenager. The discussion was never if WWE would sign her. It was when they would sign her. Story 30. Hayden Christensen went to the same high school and participated in the same drama program, similar to the program in the movie Fame. I was at a party at my friend's house, who lived across from him. I was very high and he was wearing white jeans. We had a conversation on my friend's lawn. Life as a House had just come out. Super nice guy. Story 31. I was friends with Jennifer Aniston before Friends. She was a very sweet and cool girl. We were hanging out in her apartment when she got the call that she was up for a character on 21 Jump Street, which never came to fruition. We used to play volleyball in a racquetball court, and I have been to many dinners and parties with her and her close circle of friends. It was pretty cool seeing her years later skyrocket to stardom on Friends. I still have my personal phone book with her old number. Story 32. Went to a small, very expensive private boarding school with Lana Del Rey. Every time I read interviews with her saying she grew up poor, it's very confusing. Story 33. A family member went to high school with Prince before he was famous. He was quiet and kept to himself mostly and was kind of nerdy, but he had a tight-knit group of friends that he was always with. It was a fairly recently integrated neighborhood, so the black kids and the white kids were like two different worlds. Therefore, my family member didn't ever talk to him but knew who he was and saw him all the time around the neighborhood and in the halls. Story 34. Trixie Mattel and I were in Rocky Horror in Milwaukee together for a few years. They're the same as they ever were, hardworking and hilariously funny. He came to my wedding and we got to hang out on Halloween last year, so that was awesome. Story 35. I knew Creed before they made it big. 3/4 of the band were decent guys. 1/4 of the band was the biggest douchebag I've ever met. Time proved my initial opinions to be correct. Story 36. Britney Spears, circa 1999, was backstage when she came to the food table. I chatted with her for a while, and she was as normal as any other person. Celebrity had not yet reached her. She was shy, kind, polite, and friendly, with a touch of giggle. Story 37. Went to the same school as Luke Wilson. He dated my older sister's best friend, so I knew him his senior year in high school. He was always a nice guy, and on the random occasions I bump into him in Dallas, he's the same friendly guy I knew. He was also a really good athlete, had the 800-meter record for our school for a long time. Story 38. Technically, I knew Jonathan Cheban, who was more of a celebrity hanger-on to Kim Kardashian than a celebrity himself back in college. He hung out with some friends of mine, and I never liked him. He always had a vibe that he was looking to find people to leech off of, and I was right. Story 39. I went to junior high and high school with Zero from Slipknot, also known as Sid Wilson. It was right around when grunge was breaking, but we were a bit behind in Iowa. Sid was always about a year ahead of the alternative trends. By the time most people were wearing something or listening to some band, he had already moved on to the next thing. I was a nerdy kid with nerdy friends, and we all got along with Sid despite not being in the same activities for the most part and not hanging out outside of school. He actually got along with pretty much anyone who wasn't a jerk. We actually did club volleyball together for a couple of years. It was new for our school at the time, and it had a mix of kids from different cliques rather than just athletes. Sid was a pretty decent player. He had a fairly high vertical for his size but wasn't tall enough to stand out. We lost contact partway through high school, but I have nothing but fond memories of the time we spent together. Story 40. Friends with Greta Gerwig in high school. Yes, the high school she wrote Lady Bird about. She's exactly how she seems. Quirky, hilarious, kind, and extremely intelligent. Super happy for her and all of her success. Story 41. Kenny Chesney lived in my apartment complex near Nashville. He used to bring his guitar out to the pool, play, and sing. He was a hell of a nice guy, very humble and funny. I got him a show at one of the events we had in Tucson. Not because of me, but his career took off shortly after. Story 42. I was in the same college class as John Mulaney. He was part of the improv troupe and I used to go to his shows. He had a very similar style at 18 as he does now, sounding very corny and tight-laced, and then being shockingly crass at times. Also in our class was Ramel Ross, who was recently nominated for the Best Picture Oscar for Nickel Boys. He was on the basketball team but never got any court time. He was quiet, nice, and very smart, and we're still friends. Britt Marling, creator of the OA, was also in our class, but I don't remember interacting with her. Come to think of it, Ivanka Trump was also in our class freshman year before transferring out. She lived in the same dorm as Ramel and me, and I saw her often. Story 43. I knew Bijou Phillips in middle school. She was a pathological liar and borderline feral. Her parents were not very present and let her hang out and party with adults. I felt bad for her but was also kind of afraid of her once I realized how unhinged she was. Story 44. Nikocado Avocado, if he counts back when he was just Nick Perry. He used to be an amazing violinist. I knew him back during high school, and he always had that unique personality, but he was cool. I never saw what happened to him coming. Story 45. Went to junior high and high school with him. He was always into music and liked to play poker. He was very cool and had great hair. Story 46. El Fantasma, Mexican singer. He is my cousin, and we loved to pretend we were world wrestling entertainment stars when we were little. He was into heavy metal and rock in general. I was very surprised when he made it to the top of the charts for Mexican music.